Right, yes, I guess then we will dive in. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate, first couple of hours of the conference, a hell of a lot going on, so thank you for choosing to spend some of your time here. We're, of course, going to talk about that little thing called Brexit. I guess, very briefly, my name's Will Freeman. I'm a freelance game journalist, do other bits and pieces in the games industry, and I'll introduce our panelists in a moment. But, very briefly, as I'm sure you don't need me to explain what Brexit is, and I probably couldn't because nobody can in full detail. But, it's almost certainly, it seems the withdrawal agreement bill, that was passed by MPs on the 9th. It's been with the House of Commons, Lords, oh God almighty, since the 16th. It seems like Brexit's going to go through. So really, the idea of this panel, no deal seems incredibly unlikely. We might get some perspectives from the panel on that kind of thing. But really, what we want to talk about here is kind of the impact, what planning and readiness people in games, whether you're an individual or a company, whatever your role in games is, kind of look at the opportunities, and there are challenges, of course, but, how we can collectively address those challenges. So, we have to be realistic, but I guess we're going to, don't want to dive too deeply into, was it wrong or right? I think Jazz sometimes has a couple of things to say on that issue, but so that's the direction the panel's going to be. And I think, yes, arriving fashionably late, for all the John Hare fans here that thought they were going to be disappointed. Hey John, how you doing, mate? Yes, I was going to say closest to me, so John came in just at the right time. So we've got John Hare, CEO at Tower Studios. I think it's fair to say kind of UK, global game dev veteran and legend. Recently got one of his team's games on a stamp, which is not a bad achievement. Next to him, Jazz Purewal, founder and partner at Purewal and Partners. I'm sure many of you know Jazz. Who have we got next? It's Anna Mansi, Head of Certification from the BFI, and last but not least, Louise Conolly-Smith, Head of Creative at London Partners. So, enough of my awkward waffling, let's give them a warm welcome. Right, and the first question is just if you could very briefly do like a 1 or 2 line intro just to set the context of who you are. Let's start in the opposite order. Louise.
Hi, so I'm Louise. I work at London & Partners. We are not like Jazz's company, a law company. We are, in fact, the Mayor of London's promotional organisation. So the way of describing it is that everything positive you read about London, it's probably come from us. So my role is to be relentlessly positive about London, always. I live here and I do love it, and I've worked at London & Partners for 8 years, so I still remain totally committed to the cause. Thank you.
Brilliant. Anna?
Anna Mansi, I'm Head of Certification at the British Film Institute, although in my role there we certify films, TV programmes and video games to be British to access the video games tax relief. I'm also a trustee for Games Aid and an ambassador for Autistica Play, the games arm of the charity Autistica.
Hey, I'm Jazz Purewal. I'm a lawyer, business advisor and investor to games companies and passionate gamer, and take a keen interest in Brexit from all of those perspectives. I've also, not, as you're going to hear it, influence what I'm going to say, a keen anti-Brexit activist.
John?
I'm John Hare. I'm a kind of veteran game developer. I've been making games for 35 years. The last 4 years I've been working with a team in Helsinki, in Finland. Before that, a team in Poland for 5 years, a team in Ukraine for 2 years, and a Turkish team for 6 months. And before that, just forever working in the UK all over the place. So that's my experience.
Brilliant. Right, well, then we will dive in. I mean, this is a huge, big, complex issue. I'm sure I won't get through half of these questions, but still, we will try and find some time at the end for you guys to ask questions. So, get your thinking hats on in that regard. But yeah, let's talk first of all. My God, every single question could pretty much be a panel or a one-day conference. But what might the impact for funding for games be? I mean, video game tax relief is a significant one. There is also state aid and private funding. Anna, I might put this to you, first of all, just in terms of VTGR.
Yeah, so in terms of the video games tax relief, the government is committed to it. There's not going to be any change once we leave the European Union. So there isn't, we're committed to it, it's carrying on. There's also the Creative Europe funding, which Games Developers, Rebellion, Nyam Nyam, and Italic Pig have all applied for. We are in the Creative Europe funding till the end of December. After that, we don't know whether there'll be a replacement for it or not, but there'll be, it has been said that we do need to have something, whether the government will carry on with that. But the most important thing is about video game tax relief will continue. In terms of state aid, and you may want to come in a bit, it's with Jazz, we will no longer be, be part of state aid, but we could be part of a competition market authority, so could be similar rules in terms of how we administer the video games tax relief. So as far as we're concerned, in terms of the tax relief, it's business as usual. We don't want to change any elements of the cultural testing where it's European, or we want to keep it all the same. On private funding, I'm not so much of an expert. I don't know if anyone else...
Oh, if anyone wants to say anything, but I can jump in. So just last week, we released a report which was drawn from a company called Deal Room. So we did that with Department of Culture, Ministry and Sport, and with a company called Tech UK. And the UK last year had a 188% increase in funding, VC funding. There was over 10 billion pounds, might be dollars actually, invested in the UK, of which 7 billion came to London. So we are after the US and China. One of the speakers before said, well, we're much smaller than the US and China. We are much smaller than the US and China, but we are significantly more than anywhere else in Europe. I mean, just by a huge distance. And in fact, this morning I was just speaking to a VC company out of New York, and they're going, you know what, we're really seeing the UK some very interesting developments, and we're thinking of setting up here. So I think, this isn't going to stop.
Well, just from a development perspective, I've been doing deals selling games and licensing games for 35 years. And the last 10 years, it's been pretty hard to get money out of European publishers from a developer perspective. So most of the money is actually in... We've got 2 deals at the moment, one in the US and one in China. And that's kind of where the money is. Getting the tax relief is really important, so it's great that's staying in place. I also hope that we keep this no VAT on the bills thing going, because that's just very convenient. But actually, I think that sometimes people panic too much about a change. I think everything's changing anyway. And actually, as I said, Europe, for a development perspective, isn't a great source of money for a lot of UK companies, and European companies, I might add.
So stuff about money. So the VGTR thing that Anna was talking about is underpinned by this thing called state aid, which is this idea in the European Union that member states can't advantage their own local industries too much because it would just become an absolute bloody mess. So instead, there are certain rules that say, well, if you follow these kinds of rules, then it's okay to benefit your local industries. And it took a long time for the games industry to persuade the European Union that we should have video games tax relief because of these concerns. Well, that's basically just the UK government helping the UK industry to grow. So technically, once we leave the European Union, we can do anything we like. And one of the pro-Brexit arguments for the games industry before Brexit was that this would be video games tax relief unleashed, that the government could really help the creative industries much more. And the answer to that is maybe, but like basically everything that I'm going to talk about for my little tuppenny's worth in all of this is that you've got to split everything into 3 distinct phases. There was everything up to now, the Brexit moment on the 31st of January. There's this transitional period for however long this lasts. At the moment, it runs up until the end of December. And then there's the future, right? And so we kind of know what the situation is up until the end of this year. What happens after that is so complex. And bearing in mind that in December, this country was living hour by hour as to what was going to happen in Brexit. So there's a lot of uncertainty once you get beyond the end of this year. And just a few words on funding and deals access more generally. Has the last 2 years negatively impacted the games industry from a deals perspective? Kind of hard to tell. There's no objective evidence about it. It's all a bunch of anecdotal evidence. What John was saying is right. The fundamentals are there's been a lot more money coming from Asia in the US. But equally, I could tell you 2 to 3 IPOs of games companies or games-like companies in the UK that did not happen in the last year because of uncertainty over Brexit. I could give you funding deals. I could give you financing deals that didn't happen or were complicated by Brexit. But that's just up until now. Is there going to be more certainty in the next year or so? Probably. Are we in a massive boom for our industry right now? Yes. So we are insulated to some extent. But like I'm saying, don't mistake what happened in the last 2 years for what's going to happen in the next year, and then what on earth is going to happen from December onwards from the perspective of optimism for the industry and also video game tax relief, although I know you were saying the government's clear as to where it's going to be now and it has aspirations for the future. But is it going to be significantly better? We don't know that.
I think for the time being, I think we just want to business as usual, carry on. And, you know, we may still have some sort of system that replicates state aid. And in terms of our relationships with other territories, and so we need to sort of be cautious about that. The game, you know, it's a good relief. It works across all the other sectors. So I think let's carry on with it. It's open to all sizes of studio. You know, this is an advantage we have over the French tax relief, where the minimum budget is 100,000 euros. It used to be 150,000 euros. They reduced it to 100,000. There is no minimum budget for the video games tax relief. It's open to all UK developers of all sizes. And the majority of people the majority of developers are small to medium developers as well.
It's interesting to hear that perspective. I guess we all, and I can naively think this, is that kind of the beast that was uncertainty is behind us now, but it sounds from what, as you were saying, is we still have a degree of that ahead.
I mean, just on that point, we've just done the easy bit. No, genuinely, we've done the easy bit, which is the process up to leaving the European Union, which will happen on the 31st of January. But then the rest of this year and the year after that and the year after that is going to be a complicated legal, financial, operational, all kinds of battle over, but what kind of Brexit do we want? The deal was signed and the election was fought on the basis of there is a deal, and that deal involved relatively close alignment. As soon as that election was over, we had an interview with the Chancellor just a few days ago saying there isn't going to be regulatory alignment. We're not going to be in the customs union. We're not going to be in the single market. And that's a change. I'm not expressing any view as to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying there's a lot that still needs to get figured out.
Go on, John. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just from a pragmatic point of view, as a developer who's done it my whole life and made my career and living from it, our perspective is sometimes quite different. So I was making games from '85, and we were the #1 country in the world at making games in the late '80s and early '90s, and did not capitalise on it. And the government was quite late at recognising it. Then I know people like Yuki spent a long time pushing for the tax relief, which we've eventually got, which is great. But there's another thing which has come into the business world since those '80s days, which is this idea about startups, like they're a good thing. Now, when 9 out of 10 companies go bust, that is not a good thing. It's not a great model. And the reason we were strong in the '80s and '90s is because we had a very strong publishing community in the UK. We had some of the world's best publishers as well. I'm hoping that with this change of staff, out of it comes some strong publishing, because from a developer's perspective, it's enough risk to spend a few years making a game, 3 or 4 years. If we're then trying to also publish a market with no experience, your likelihood of failure is very high. And actually, as an experienced guy, I've gone through working with publishers for 20 years, self-publishing for 8 years, and now in the last 2 years going back to working with publishers and actually making more money because it secures my business, it de-risks it. So there's a lot of issue about de-risk we need to discuss, and to not panic about headlines and things up here and think on the floor. You know, do we really mind if the half of our companies aren't going to succeed? Stay that way. Let's push the money where it's going to actually go somewhere, and not continue to play games to keep everyone happy and busy but not ultimately productive. So I'm hoping that this is the change that comes out of this change with the EU.
We're almost halfway through, and I've asked one of my questions out of 15 so far. My fault for the intro, let's face it. I think we could linger on that discussion, not linger, but stay with that discussion, but to move it on, and it's kind of a related thing. What do you think the impact will be, if any, on exporting games? I mean, obviously we've moved to this digital era. One could naively think that transcends some of the issues, but in terms of the movement of product, do you see any opportunity or negative impact? How should one prepare for that? Anybody?
Well, we're getting all our money from the US and China at the moment, so to me it makes no difference. I'm working with a developer in Helsinki. I don't have to pay them VAT, which is great because it makes everything easier to account for. we have no employees living in anyone else's country, which is where you might have problems. And that's another thing to touch on this. There's a lot of ways to partner with companies in Europe, apart from going and living in their country. I've spent the last 4 years working in Helsinki with a company, basically as a partnership of two companies, and splitting them in the money. Previous to that, I was publishing with a company in Poland. I was the publisher again, splitting them in the money, going out there, outsourcing myself to them to work, but only just taking my time. Before that, even if there are problems with access, I worked in Ukraine and Turkey. Relatively difficult country, Ukraine. You just get a visa easily. You just need a little piece of paper from the company and you come in. Even in China now, you get a 2-year visa. As long as you don't stay for 3 months, you can go home and come back again. It's not as complex as people think it is, and I've been doing it for the last 15 years of my working life.
But on that note about, I guess, if I'm talking exporting, does anyone think there'll be an impact on how games are distributed or how game companies might want to distribute their games? Anyone want to brave that one?
I'll go for it. So, you to use jargon for a second, there's a thing called tariff barriers, there's a thing called non-tariff barriers. A lot of the Brexit debate has been about tariff barriers, which is the idea that you literally have to pay taxes for something to come into a country or out of a country. That's a solid thing. We can understand that. It makes sense. It's the kind of thing that is a big concern in the manufacturing world. As a very largely digital industry, particularly for developers and publishers, direct tariff barriers are very unlikely to be a problem going forward. It's the non-tariff barriers we have to worry about. It's the fact that the rules are different between one country or another. One of the real benefits we've had in the games industry and all the digital industries is that because the rules have become increasingly aligned on IP, on data, on consumer, on tax like VAT, there's less and less friction, and it's a lot easier for you to distribute your games all around the world. Like we act as though it's like God's given right to us, like we have the God-given right to distribute on a frictionless basis around the world. That's based on a series of rules that have been built over time. So the worry is not that there's going to be taxes on our games necessarily, but that in lots and lots of indirect ways, if the EU and the UK diverge, it starts becoming harder in lots and lots and lots of different unsaid ways. And I can't prove it because we're not there yet. And it's not doom and gloom that suddenly all the games industry companies are going to fall over. It's just that in lots of unseen ways, it starts getting harder. Like to pick John's example, in a no-deal scenario, you absolutely would be paying VAT to that company in Helsinki. You would, and that is a cash hit to you because you wouldn't be able to recover it except over a time period. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that's an example of where we may see things. And does that make it harder to export from the UK? Maybe. So, for example, I'm the chairman of a company called Face Punch, which is a company in Walsall that made Garry's Mod and Rust, very quietly successful. We have set up a subsidiary in Ireland so that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, we would switch and our Steam distribution contract would be in Ireland. And from that perspective, we would follow the Irish rules going forward. I could name you a good number of companies that have quietly done that. Not all of them by any stretch, but enough of them to try to be insurance against what Will was talking about there. Could there be an impact on exporting?
You're almost, I guess, the other, and as part of the research for this, looking into kind of the questions developers are asked or concerned about, and publishers and studios. So on a related issue seems to be, I guess, importantly, a lot of game companies come to the UK, game companies that didn't start here, administrative headquarters, large publishers. I might put this to you first, Louise. Do you see there being significant impact, or what the impact will be on that? As I put this to you, as obviously you're slightly involved in the process.
So we help, just in case I hadn't explained that, we help overseas companies come to London and set up here. We work really closely with central government to do that for the UK, but it's in the name, London and Partners, so it's all about London for me. We are not seeing a drop-off from overseas companies who are interested. We are seeing that they are taking longer to make a decision, and I think that's actually some clarity is helpful. Lots of companies don't like uncertainty, and I think the fact that people sort of know what the direction is, even if they don't know what the deal looks like, they know that we're leaving, so at least they can work that out. The other thing that we have seen is because the pound has gone down in value by 30%, we have actually seen a lot of acquisitions of UK companies by overseas companies, particularly by North American and Chinese, whether it's acquisitions or investments. And what that means, and it's quite weird, is that companies like Sensible Object, which are a really brilliant British company, are now Niantic, a really British American company. And so that's quite odd for us, because in a way, a lot of the really amazing British developers, partly, I mean, again, another company I met this morning from the US said, we're interested in acquisition. And it took me a long while to realize when I spoke to Chinese companies, when they said, oh, we're really interested in IP, what they really meant was, we're really interested in buying companies. And that just took a twig. Now, I'm not saying that's the ideal scenario. The ideal scenario is for developers to have a really successful company overseas and to go, actually, we really want to have an entity in the UK, and then I want to really make the case that they should come to London. And we're not seeing a drop-off.
Right.
And it's can I just make a point on that, because this is, again, how you can do deals as a developer. So, I mean, I generate IP, we develop it in Finland, and then we license it out. Now, we've licensed to a company in the States and a company in China, got very good money last year, without losing any shares, no one buying us out. So you can access money via old-fashioned publishing deals. It is out there. Yeah. And for a developer, it's more stabilizing, and you don't lose that, as you're saying, lose that power, lose that control. So it's harder, but I would love to see a bigger push for this and to push up the publishing community, because the period in the Angry Birds years, like it was almost 10 years ago now, where you could just publish yourself and quickly become big, that's gone. I mean, there's over 1 million products out there to fight with. It's sensible in this time to partner with good people to help you on what they've got expertise in, be it hitting sales distribution channels, marketing, whatever, not try to do everything yourself. So I would advise developers, look for good publishing partners. Certainly it's worked for us. This last year particularly has been good, actually.
And I'm just going to jump in. The other thing that we know is that people, the reason that they're coming to London is because of the talent. I mean, so it's partly the money, but more importantly, it's the people, the developers who are already here. And I think that London absolutely, again, in this case, punches above its weight. It has more developers than the rest of Europe. I mean, not the rest of Europe combined, but certainly more than other cities that are big centers for developers. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see overseas companies come here, is that initially they're looking at other markets, and then when they actually see the developer talent, particularly those not from Europe, they come to London. And that's for us is one of the real differentiators that we've been able to build on, and that we've been able to continue to build on.
But at the same time, just to give a counterpoint to that, there's a difference between all of that and actually having what you were talking about, Will, which is having your headquarters here, right? Like, I used to work in Silicon Valley. My job was helping high-growth Silicon Valley startups to move to Europe and ideally to the UK. And a huge part of that is the same reason why you had a lot of Japanese migration into the UK, business migration, which is you have that entry point into the rest of the European Union. That is not going to exist, and that was a big factor. It's not the only factor, because other factors were time zone, talent, language, rule of law, all of those things are still here, but a massive component of that we are about to rip away, and we don't know what we are replacing it with. So you're absolutely right, and that's why you're going to see, and you're already seeing quietly, a bit more interest in islands. I take no pleasure in that, but that's a bit more competition that didn't exist previously in quite the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but one of the reasons people come here as well is because of the UK market, because it's a huge market, and particularly on things like mobile, we're very mobile first. I mean, I don't know how many of you know, particularly when I'm thinking Germany, France, Spain, they're not really where we are as consumers, and I think that's why a lot of companies do come here. I mean, I agree with you. I think it is going to change, but I also, you know, when we look at how the British consumer buys online, and that's partly because we have such a strong financial technology sector, that has driven a lot of behaviours in a lot of other sectors, including mobile gaming.
I'm hearing it from a perspective of an old British developer who remembers when we were the top, right? So I'm hearing there used to be a restriction on pushing the money into Britain to stop it being unfair. I'm also hearing we're trying to invite people from other countries into this country. All I can see by these changes is a benefit for British developers and publishers. So actually, let's just see how these changes settle down. There will be some winners and losers, as always. In business, I've got a new phrase at the moment. It's like waves, they go up and down. As long as you don't drown on the downs, you survive for the next up. So let's just see how it goes. But I can see some positives about what everyone is saying for us here in UK-based developers. And that doesn't mean we don't work with people from other countries. It means we work with them in a slightly different way, actually, and have more ownership.
I was going to try and... Yeah, does anybody want a brave answering movement of people in 2 minutes before I hold it over? But yeah, I guess that's the other thing, you know, we have an amazing, in London and the UK, this tremendous bed of talent, and talent is something that moves across the world in the games industry. You know, I guess when people think of Brexit, movement of people is probably fairly high up the list of things they associate with it.
Can I be really quick on that?
Yeah,
I've been working in Europe since 2006. I've never changed citizenship, never moved house. I just go backwards and forwards and have people coming backwards and forwards to me. Actually, if you work in the right way, you simply do not need to change the country you live in to work with people in different countries. It's really, really simple.
Anybody else have any thoughts on how that...
movement will end. The Conservative government hasn't yet stated what it's going to do. It is going to be in an incredibly difficult position because free movement is a brilliant example of the tension between the nationalistic approach and the anti-immigration approach and the pro-business approach. It's just very hard to see how that square is going to get circled, and is another example of why I was saying this is the easy bit. I understand and respect what you're saying, but there are a lot of UK games companies that directly want to bring talented folks from Europe to come and live with their families in the UK. And that system will change, and we've no idea what's going to replace it.
Right, so uncertainty is, again, the catchword there. Right, we have a whopper. Oh, we've got 5.5 minutes left. I've got... and all of these questions are really simple, and I'm sure... So, yeah, I've got plenty more here, believe me, but just to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions, especially if they're really specific to your own situation, or not, general broad questions. Does anybody... Yes, I think a microphone will be...
We've got lots.
Look at this. No job too small. Brilliant. Thanks, Anna.
Hello. Yeah, quick question for John. You were saying about we're developers, and you were saying find a good publisher. How would a developer go about finding good publishers?
Well, you've got to go to a lot of conferences and speak to a lot of people. I mean, we've been making the latest game for 4 years, and we spoke to 80 publishers. I think I've probably turned down 12 deals. Signed one with a company in China a year and a half ago and one with a company in the States who got us into Apple Arcade 6 months ago. But it's just about surviving. That's where experience comes in, having a nose for what is a good or a bad deal. But you've got to do a lot of fishing to catch the best fish. So that's it. Just keep surviving that time. But again, for anyone looking for a development deal, look for an advance against royalties, or it's a massive risk for any developer. Because once the company's paid you in advance, they've got skin in the game, they've got to fight for your title. If they pay you nothing up front, they're not going to fight for it as hard. It's really simple.
It's great, thanks.
Anybody? Oh, thank you very much. Anybody else got a question? Come on, all these... Am I not seeing any hands? I guess I'll have to go... Ah, fantastic. The man with his hand up. It's my version of doing David Dimbleby, but, you know, when there's only one. Give it...
So what happened to the British publishers from the 80s? What actually happened to them?
Everyone sold out within a space of 5 years when some big money turned up, all of us, including us as developers. You know, we'd all worked hard during the 80s and the 90s. We hit the mid-90s. All the big media companies like Sony and Warner and Bertelsmann showed up, and we just all went, OK, there you go. That was actually what happened. We all got greedy and grabbed the opportunity before it disappeared.
OK, so it wasn't really the EU that destroyed all the publishers?
Not at all, no. It had gone before that really happened, yeah.
So what will happen now? I mean, how will these publishers re-establish themselves?
Anyone got any ideas how we can set up new, powerful, UK-based publishers?
I'm looking at one of them right now.
Well, there you go. So we just keep on working on that, but trying to build a community. We seriously haven't got enough of these companies kicking around in the country, and it helps UK-based developers to have strong UK-based publishers. It's no coincidence now we're going to the US and China mostly to get the bigger deals, you know?
There was another question from the chap down here on the second front row.
Hi, this kind of relates to the idea that all the big publishers kind of got wiped out in the 80s, and also the idea that all this money is coming in from US and China with the pound falling. So aren't we at risk of basically kind of wiping out our own UK games industry as all of this money comes in, all of these game companies get bought out, they become assimilated by the US, the taxes get paid over in the US, and the industry just kind of collapses in on itself and repeats the whole process again? Because it's not these people coming into buying. It's not encouraging people to stay in the UK.
Actually, I'm going to take that as well, but I'd really be interested in your comments. So one of the things that you see, and I think you see it more now, is that when companies make money. So I'm going to talk about Bossa. So Bossa raised money last year, and one of the things that you'll see is that they then, although it wasn't a huge amount, it encourages them to grow their London presence or their UK presence. And they sometimes, not always, become investors themselves, and they will invest in other UK businesses. So it's actually a positive when money comes in. I agree you don't necessarily want them to all sell out, but it is a real positive when British companies get investment, because they will often use it and it will grow their ecosystem. That's what we've really seen in other sectors, and I also believe in the game sector.
I mean, my answer is really simple. I'm earning in dollars from the US and dollars from China at the moment. And every day I look and hope that rate is as low as it possibly can be. Because if you're earning dollars at the moment, and that's where a lot of money's coming from, dollar-based contracts, it's actually better for us. We're getting more pounds for our dollar right now. So it's not always as simple as it seems. From our perspective, it's great. We've made actually quite a lot of money because of the currency change this last year.
I think we better, because of time, end on that note. It's simpler than it seems, or it's not. It's incredibly complicated. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for the questions. And, of course, thank you to the panellists. A round of applause for everyone.